Welcome to the story of Julius Caesar. Tonight, we will journey through Rome, witness the rise of a boy who would change history, and explore the world of power, ambition, and destiny. Close your eyes, relax, and let the past unfold. The city of Rome lay under a deep, quiet night. Yet the stillness was deceiving. It was a calm that bore the weight of unspoken tensions, the kind that drifts in from cobbled streets, winding alleys, and shadowed forums. Torches flickered weakly along the city's walls, throwing trembling light across the worn stones, as if the buildings themselves were holding their breath. The Tiber River moved like a dark ribbon through the city, whispering secrets of revolts past, of citizens betrayed, of emperors not yet crowned. Rome was older than memory, and yet, even as centuries had molded its greatness, cracks were forming, deep, hidden, and ominous. The Republic had survived wars and kings, but now it faced a threat unlike any before. The ambition of men who were neither gods nor innocent, yet wielded power with terrifying skill. In a modest home tucked near the Subura district, a small child stirred restlessly on a simple cot. He listened to the muffled sounds of the city at night, distant voices arguing, the shuffle of armored feet on stone, and the soft lapping of the Tiber against its banks. Even in his youth, there was something different about him. He noticed the tension in the air, the weight of history pressing down on the city, and somehow, though only a boy, he understood that the world around him was far more dangerous than the streets he played in during the day. The child was Gaius Julius Caesar, and though the future held wonders and horrors alike, he did not yet know the measure of his destiny. All he felt was the quiet stirrings of something vast, something eternal, and a heartbeat of fear he could not yet name. Rome, at that time, was a city of contradictions. It was magnificent, with marble columns and bustling markets, yet it was fragile, governed by men whose loyalty shifted with the wind, and whose ambition often outstripped wisdom. The Senate, the supposed guardian of the Republic, was riddled with factionalism. Noble families jostled for influence, their rivalries spilling over into violence and deceit. Citizens whispered rumors of corrupt magistrates, of laws ignored or twisted, of generals who commanded armies more loyal to their own ambition than to the state. And through all this, the people of Rome continued their daily lives, oblivious in some ways, aware in others, always caught between reverence for tradition and fear of change. That night, the household of Caesar faced a personal threat that mirrored the city's unrest. His mother, Aurelia, moved quietly through the house, her eyes sharp with concern, her hands steady despite the tension that gripped her heart. She knew the danger that stalked her family, the threats from men like Sulla, who demanded obedience and punished dissent. Caesar's father, Gaius Julius Caesar Sr., had died when the boy was very young, leaving the family exposed to the whims of political enemies. Aurelia's love for her son was fierce, but she also understood the necessity of preparing him for a world that did not yield to innocence. She whispered words of caution, of patience, of vigilance. And though Caesar lay in bed pretending to sleep, he absorbed every detail, the fear, the strategy, the quiet calculation of survival. It was a lesson that would echo throughout his life. In Rome, even children were never safe from the reach of power. As the hours dragged on, the child's imagination wandered, yet it was never far from reality. He pictured the streets as they would be in years to come, filled with senators' processions, crowded forums, and the thunder of marching legions. He imagined the voices of his enemies, the plotting of ambitious men, and the weight of expectations that would one day rest upon his shoulders. Even then, he was aware of legacy, of what it meant to leave a mark, to shape history rather than be shaped by it. Little did he know, the very city around him, with its stones laid by generations, would bear witness to his rise. By the first light of dawn, the streets had begun to stir. Merchants opened their shops, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the earthy aroma of the Tiber. Children ran along the alleys, playing games that mimicked battles they could not yet understand. Yet for young Caesar, the day held no innocence. The world outside was a classroom of danger and opportunity, and every sound was a lesson in vigilance. He watched as guards patrolled the forum, as senators argued with a passion that sometimes erupted into violence, as the city moved with a rhythm that was both chaotic and precise. In this environment, every step, every glance, every word could have consequences that stretched far beyond the immediate moment. Caesar's education had begun long before he held a scroll or learned the art of rhetoric. It had begun with observation. He noticed how the powerful spoke, how the fearful moved, how loyalty could shift as easily as the wind. He learned patience not from teachers, but from the cautious advice of his mother. He learned courage not from swordplay, but from surviving a world that demanded it of him from the start. And in this crucible of early experience, the foundations of a man who would command armies and shake empires were quietly being laid. The boy who would become Caesar moved through the streets of Rome with a mind far older than his years. Every conversation, every gesture, every glance in the forum or the marketplace became a lesson in human nature. He observed senators debating with sharp tongues, their voices rising and falling like the tides, each word carefully chosen, each pause deliberate. He noticed how ambition could drive even the most learned men to folly, how fear could twist loyalty into betrayal, and how power often depended less on merit than on perception. His mother Aurelia remained a constant guide. She encouraged him to read, to memorize the names and deeds of past leaders, and to understand the subtle currents that shaped Rome. But she also taught him silence, the most potent tool in the arsenal of survival. In her presence, he learned to speak only when the moment demanded, to watch, to wait, and to calculate. She reminded him that wisdom was not merely knowing the law, but knowing the hearts of men. By the age of 12, Caesar had witnessed enough political intrigue to fill volumes. The city itself was a living classroom, magistrates negotiating bribes, soldiers bending to the whims of their generals, and plebeians rising in anger when injustice touched their lives. Rome, chaotic and vibrant, was both cruel and beautiful. The young boy absorbed it all, imprinting each lesson on his mind, shaping a perception of the world that would remain unshakable for decades. Schooling followed, but it was secondary to experience. Tutors instructed him in Latin and Greek, in history and philosophy, but it was in the streets, in the shadows of the forum, that he learned the essence of leadership. He read the gestures of men, the tremor in a voice, the hidden anxiety behind a confident smile. He discovered that true authority did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and that subtlety often commanded more than brute force. By 15, Caesar had witnessed the first signs of Sulla's purges. Families like his were threatened, forced to make difficult choices. He saw the power of fear in action and the consequences of defiance. One uncle was exiled, another quietly disappeared. These events etched themselves into the young boy's soul. He learned that life in Rome was not measured by years, but by the careful navigation of danger and opportunity. Every step was a test, every encounter a lesson. As he grew, Caesar's fascination with the military became evident, not for the thrill of battle alone, but for the discipline, strategy, and subtle psychology that warfare demanded. He observed soldiers, their loyalty bought by pay or fear, their courage often fragile until proven. He memorized formations, tactics, and the cadence of commands, imagining himself not just as a soldier, but as a commander whose decisions would ripple across nations. The political scene remained a constant backdrop. Senators rose and fell, tribunes manipulated the people, and alliances were forged and shattered within the same day. Caesar watched quietly, noting every move, every betrayal, every act of cunning. By now, he understood a simple truth. Power in Rome was never given. It was taken, preserved only by skill, calculation, and courage. During these formative years, personal tragedies also struck. His father's early death left gaps in protection and mentorship, yet strengthened his resolve. Aurelia guided him, and at times the loyalty of friends became crucial. Even small acts, like a neighbor defending the family or a servant's quiet observation, were lessons in human reliability and deception alike. The boy's mind catalogued every detail, storing knowledge that would serve him in years to come. By the time Caesar reached 17, the pieces of his character had coalesced. He was ambitious but patient, fearless yet calculating, observant yet poised. Rome was a stage, and he had learned to read the script without speaking a line. Small victories in local disputes, clever negotiations with older, stronger boys, and subtle acts of diplomacy had honed his instincts. These were not mere childhood games. They were the early rehearsals for a life that would shake the very foundations of the Republic. Even in the quiet nights, when the city slept and the Tiber whispered against the stones, Caesar's mind was restless. He would walk alone through the empty streets, imagining campaigns yet to be fought, debates yet to be held, and victories yet to be claimed. The city was alive, a teacher whose lessons were harsh but necessary. Every stone, every column, every shadow carried a memory, a warning, a story. And then came the first encounters with Rome's merciless politics in earnest. Tribunes and senators began to notice the young man whose presence was calm yet commanding, whose words were rare but sharp, and whose mind seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of youth. Allies cautiously approached, enemies cautiously watched. Every interaction was a dance of caution and ambition, of observation and pretense. It was also during this period that Caesar began to understand rhetoric, not merely as a tool to speak, but as a weapon to influence thought and perception. He listened to orators in the forum, noting pauses, intonations, the subtle ways gestures could sway a crowd. He imitated, practiced in private, refined in solitude. Every lesson in language, every observation of human psychology, added layers to a mind already destined for command. By the close of this segment of his life, Julius Caesar was no longer merely a boy observing Rome. He was a student of humanity, a scholar of power, and a strategist in thought, if not yet in deed. The foundations laid in those early years, the lessons in observation, patience, courage, and diplomacy, would carry him through the storms ahead. Every subtlety he had absorbed, every whisper of power, every shadowed threat, was a building block for the empire he would one day navigate and, in time, control. As Caesar stepped out from the shadow of youth into the early bloom of manhood, Rome's streets no longer whispered lessons. They demanded action. The boy who had once wandered the forum as an observer now walked it as a participant, every stride measured, every glance considered. The city, vast and teeming with ambition, had become a chessboard, and he, though still young, understood the importance of every move. Families with long histories of influence, senators drunk on the illusion of power, and rival generals with armies loyal only to their own names. All were pieces to be studied, understood, and, when necessary, maneuvered. Caesar's first steps into political life were cautious but deliberate. He sought connections with older men, allies whose wisdom and experience could teach him the subtler arts of influence. Yet he also watched for weakness, for moments when a careless word or a fleeting arrogance might open a door that others overlooked. He spoke seldom, yet when he did, his words carried weight beyond his years. Citizens began to notice the young man who listened more than he spoke, who smiled at the right moment, whose gaze seemed to see both the present and the possibilities beyond. War, the ever-present shadow over Rome, beckoned next. Caesar's fascination with the military, honed during boyhood, now demanded practice and mastery. He enlisted not merely as a soldier, but as a student of strategy, discipline, and leadership. Every march, every drill, every interaction with comrades was studied, catalogued, and analyzed. He learned the rhythms of command, the way a disciplined army could move as one, how morale could crumble under poor leadership, and how subtle gestures could inspire loyalty that blood alone could not purchase. He observed his superiors not simply to obey, but to understand what made them effective and where they faltered. Rome was never forgiving of mistakes, yet every challenge Caesar faced became a lesson. He endured long hours of training under harsh conditions, observing how fear and courage danced within the hearts of men. He witnessed the bonds forged in hardship and the fractures that appeared under stress. And as he emerged from these trials, a quiet confidence began to settle into his posture, his speech, and his decisions. Caesar was no longer just learning. He was becoming a man capable of shaping events rather than being shaped by them. Back in the city, politics moved in tandem with military life. The Republic was both fragile and intricate, and Caesar quickly realized that victory on the battlefield alone was not enough. Influence in Rome required cunning, alliances, and the ability to read every subtle signal of ambition or envy. He studied the consuls, the senators, the tribunes, and the plebeians alike. He learned how to inspire loyalty without inciting jealousy, how to promise enough to gain support without overcommitting, and how to act decisively when hesitation could cost everything. As he entered his 20s, Caesar's reputation began to grow. He was known not merely as the son of a noble house, but as a man whose judgment, courage, and insight seemed beyond his age. Allies sought him, rivals watched him, and the city's undercurrents of power shifted subtly in response to his presence. Even minor victories, resolving disputes, protecting the innocent, speaking for the overlooked, built layers of respect and influence that would later serve as the foundation for his ascent. Caesar's education, once the quiet observation of a child, had now evolved into the active engagement of a man shaping his destiny. He learned that patience and timing were as crucial as courage, that subtle persuasion often outweighed open confrontation, and that history rewarded those who could see the long arc of events and act with precision when the moment demanded. Each lesson, each encounter, each challenge faced in these early years was not isolated. They were threads in a tapestry that would one day cover the entire Roman world. And yet, even as his abilities grew, danger remained constant. Rome was never static. Political enemies, rival generals, and conspiracies lurked in every corner. Caesar witnessed betrayals, false accusations, and the often brutal consequences of miscalculation. He understood that power was never granted. It was claimed, maintained, and defended through intellect, strategy, and sometimes sheer audacity. The city's whispering streets, once lessons in observation, now demanded action, and Caesar moved with a precision and foresight that few could match. By the mid-20s, the young man who had once been a careful observer had begun to leave his mark on Rome. He served in minor political positions, gaining insight into law, governance, and the delicate balance between personal ambition and public service. Every speech, every negotiation, every subtle maneuver in the Senate or the Forum was an exercise in influence and foresight. Allies were cultivated, rivals tested, and opportunities seized with the quiet determination that had defined his youth. Military campaigns soon followed, further solidifying Caesar's growing reputation. He led troops with a combination of strategy, courage, and attention to the human element. Soldiers trusted him because he understood them, because he had observed them from the beginning, because he had walked their path and shared in their hardships. He studied the terrain, the enemy's habits, and the subtleties of timing and supply. Each victory was not merely a conquest of land, but a confirmation of the lessons Rome had taught him since childhood. As the years unfolded, Caesar's ambitions became evident. He sought more than fleeting glory. He sought to understand the mechanisms of power, the structures that governed loyalty and obedience, the ways in which influence could ripple across the Republic. He recognized that true mastery lay not just in commanding armies, but in shaping minds, anticipating reactions, and maneuvering events toward a desired outcome. Every encounter, every choice, every calculated risk was a step on the ladder of destiny. And so, by the close of this period, Julius Caesar was no longer merely a man of potential. He was a figure poised on the edge of greatness, a strategist, a leader, and a master of the intricate dance of Roman politics and warfare. The foundations laid in observation, patience, courage, and diplomacy had merged with action, forging a man capable of commanding respect, loyalty, and fear. The city of Rome, with all its tumult, intrigue, and splendor, was now both his canvas and his stage. The world was beginning to recognize the rise of a man who would soon stand at the center of history, shaping not only the fate of Rome, but the very course of civilization itself. And in the quiet moments when the city slept and the Tiber flowed like liquid night, Caesar's mind was already planning, imagining, calculating, ever forward, ever ambitious, ever aware that the path to power was a journey that demanded both patience and audacity.